Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
When it comes to weight loss, no 2 people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan. He can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that never ends.
And sometimes
never starts,
very
really.
rarely starts.
Sometimes the start's a bit dodgy. What the middle though? The middle.
Oh, right in the middle. Right in the middle. What are we doing today, Peter? We've been doing quite a lot on the Somme and some very serious stuff. But what are we doing today?
Well, another chance for us to have a bit of, not relaxation entirely, because there's some sad moments even in this one. But what we're doing is the 2nd Royal Norfolk Regiment and how they rebuilt in England. Why did they have to rebuild, Gary? And this was an utterly tragic episode. I don't think either of us particularly enjoyed doing that one.
No, I mean, they needed to rebuild following the massacre at Le Paradis. And, we described it as murderous.
Yes,
because that's what it was.
It was murder, and it was awful. And the battalion had been cut to ribbons before that, and then, of course, nearly 100 of them were killed at that massacre.
Yeah, so where did they come back to?
Well, they came back and they concentrated at a place that you've been to a lot in your life, Idle, which is on the outskirts of Bradford.
Or is it Idle?
It's Idle.
You sure it's Idle and not Idle?
Oh, it'll be the death of you.
Yeah, that's just outside Bradford, which is in Yorkshire.
Yorkshire. And they were back there by early June 1940. And how do they rebuild a battalion in those days? Do they get everybody from Norwich? It's a Norfolk regiment. Does everybody come from Britannia Barracks? Or what do they do?
No, I mean, clearly that would be impractical. So joining them was a draft of about 350 men from the infantry training centres of the Essex and Royal Berkshire regiments, which were based at Blandford Camp in Dorset.
So these are wartime conscripts, I presume, and they've completed their 6-month basic training, or whatever it is?
Just completed it, and most of them were not overly concerned about losing their original cat badges. And you're going to open by being Lance Corporal Ben McRae, or McRae even, of A Company, 2nd Norfolks.
We were all Berkshires then, but suddenly we were told that we were transferred. We would now be in the Royal Norfolk Regiment. We would keep our numbers and be issued with new cat badges, which was the Britannia. Well, 1 or 2 blokes were, I don't go a lot on this, what's it all about, you know? But it didn't make any difference. Our pay wasn't altered, it was no big deal. It was just another regiment. We didn't know, we hadn't got a clue who they were until we got to Bradford. And how do you think people reacted to people from different parts of the country gathering together?
Well, there's the usual regional banter, isn't there, which always leads to fun, frolics and enlivening of the atmosphere.
And you're going to give a bit of an illustration of this when you're going to be Private Fred Rolleston of D Company, 2nd Norfolks.
There was a little bit of rivalry, in so much, of course, that they were Norfolks, and the majority of us posted were Londoners. You can tell by my accent.
Yeah, perfect. Spot on. One of your best.
It is. Cockneys. One of the early mornings, the Lance Corporal, a Norfolk, came round to call us. His brogue was, come on you, over here and get on up hold of it. From underneath the blankets, the whole chorus came out. Swede! He wasn't very pleased.
Oh dear! So that's the nickname of they were all called Swedes at that time. Now, some as in the vegetable.
Vegetable, yes.
Yeah, not the natives of Sweden. Now, some of the new drafts, they knew they were joining a rail. 2nd Battalion Royal Norfolk. That's going to be a regular battalion, and they were a bit disturbed. What they saw wasn't quite what they were expected. And who am I going to be?
You're going to be Private Dennis Boast. Of the HQ Company 2nd Norfolks.
We'd been highly trained, and when we saw these dishevelled soldiers, we were a bit upset. We were a little bit surprised that this was the regular army just turned up and not looking in very good shape. But that was very unfair of us. Why is it unfair of us? Well, we know.
We know. The reasons become perfectly obvious when the mail finally catches up with them, and I'm going to be Corporal Bill Seymour of the 2nd Norfolks. There were several of them standing round, and the post sergeant was sorting out sacks of mail. As he was pulling out letters from the mail bags, they were saying such things as, no, he cocked it, no, he cocked it, he's back, right through these sacks of mail. It sounded very bad.
And it was very bad. That's why all the drafts were there in the first place, of course. Now, the battalion moved from Idle, or as you would have it, Idle. I'm not actually... You've made me doubt myself now.
I wouldn't want you to doubt yourself.
And they went to a new camp at Driffield Woods on the 22nd of July, 1940. And at the same day... Driffield.
I learnt to drive at Driffield.
Because that became the...
It's just outside Hull.
And they became the... what was it? Army driving
Well,
centre.
at that time it was Army. I think it became all services later on.
Now, a new commanding officer arrived, and this is Lieutenant Colonel George Winter. A slightly enigmatic figure, and I'm going to be Private Stan Roffey of the Carrier Platoon, HQ Company, 2nd Norfolks. Very eccentric. If we went out on a scheme somewhere, or a route march, he would lie in wait for you. He knew the route you were coming in, he'd hide himself somewhere. We'd be marching along, and then you'd hear a voice shout out, "What is that man doing with his rifle?" You didn't know where he was. We were all looking round. We didn't know where the voice was coming from. We thought someone was pulling our leg. I'm sure he meant it, more than aware of what was really happening. What else is happening?
Well, the battalion, they get a draft of a number of regular NCOs from the 1st Royal Norfolk Regiment who'd recently returned from India. So their role was to help stiffen the drafts of new recruits flooding in from the depot at Britannia Barracks and from other regiments as well.
The ones we've been talking about, yeah. The Essex and all the rest of them. Yeah. Who's amongst them there? Well, amongst them is one of the old sweats, was the imposing figure, and I mean imposing figure. I remember interviewing him very well, of Corporal Bert Fitt, who'd already been in the army about 7 years. Now, Bert Fitt was a giant of a man. I'm not sure how tall he was. He was about 6'2", but he seemed a lot. Bullet head. He looked like every senior NCO you've ever met in your life. This time, though, he's just a corporal. He'd go on to be RSM of the Norfolks. He was an imposing figure, and he had a voice like a clap of thunder. Anyway, you're going to play the part of Corporal Bert Fitt of A Company.
They were already a cadet for NCOs in the company, and the instructor was a Corporal Sculthorpe. Now, he was self-taught, and I had to go on this card from the day I arrived there. Of course, nobody knew anything about me, and the first day the chap was teaching wrong. He was just teaching the positions as he saw them, or as he thought of them. No laid-down sequence at all. This is what upset me. After the day had finished, I got the instructor and told him that he was teaching wrong. He complained to Company Sergeant Major, who sent for me, gave me a rocket and put me before the company commander over it. When I went before the company commander, I told him what certificates I held, and he asked the Sergeant Major, "Is this correct?" Well, why isn't he on a cadre under Sculthorpe when he should be taking it? I was immediately put in charge of the cadre.
That Fitt's rapidly promoted to sergeant, something that never happened to you.
Well, certainly not rapidly.
And his hard-won experience is vital in the months of training that follow. I mean, that's what you need. There's no more important figure than NCOs in giving a unit training, giving them a sense of purpose, even if that sense of purpose is hating the training NCO. Now, amongst the drafts coming in, there's lots from various regiments. I want to make this very clear to rebuild the battalion. It was a large draft from the Royal Warwickshire Regiment. Brummies, supposedly Brummies. Again, they were all coming in from everywhere, I expect. Well, why weren't battalions all from... this is just put you on the spot. Why aren't battalions all taken from the same area like they were in the early days of the First World War?
You mean like Pals battalions where whole streets got wiped out? That sort of battalion.
That's it. So they weren't doing this in the Second World War. Now, the Royal Warwickshires, some of these drafts weren't quite as someone like Bert Fitt would want to them. And you're going to be Bert Fitt again, A Company.
Well, like every other battalion, if you transfer men from one battalion to the other, you obviously don't transfer your best men. So we got a mixed bag. Quite a number of them had been called up to service and didn't care what they did or what happened to them. They weren't very helpful. Some of them were quite terrors. They'd go out and cause trouble if they could, chiefly fighting. Going out, getting drunk, missing the bus home and being late coming in.
Now, I want to make just a little bit of detail about Bert Fitt and also you, Gary, is that this sort of behaviour, going out, getting drunk, coming in late, fighting, was exactly what Bert Fitt had been famous for in all the 7 years of his service.
So this is a poacher turned gamekeeper.
And you'll find that coming up again in a moment when they literally do that. Now, what about the officers? Where are they coming from?
Well, they come from various sources as well. Now, one of them, Sam Horner, he's a member of a prosperous family of land agents who were based in Norwich, and his father had served with distinction with the 2nd Norfolk Regiment in Mesopotamia and knew exactly what path he wanted to follow. Now, advised by his father on the outset of war to be patient before enlisting, he first took the opportunity to taste life as a student at Trinity College, Cambridge, and found it perfectly acceptable.
Oh, bet he did.
Now, from there, where did he go, Pete?
Did he just become an ordinary soldier?
No, from there, he went to the Officers Cadet Training Unit before receiving his commission in 1940.
Are we getting a tinge of the Old Boys Network here?
Well, where do you think he ends up? I mean, the Old Boys Network certainly swings into action in his case, and he gets assigned to his father's old battalion.
So, all these young, inexperienced officers like Sam Horner, they're arriving at the 2nd Norfolks. And what do you think how do you think the NCOs reacted? Would they be delighted?
Well, most of the NCOs sort of took the view that they'd forgotten more than the officers would ever know. And Horner finds himself in command of the newly promoted Sergeant Fitt. And you're going to be Second Lieutenant Sam Horner of A Company, 2nd Norfolks.
I was received and welcomed. They knew I was coming. They knew a bit about my history, and they knew my father was a famous First World War member. I found myself posted to 8th Platoon in A Company, which was my father's old company and platoon. I was introduced to my platoon sergeant, one Sergeant Fitt. I thought when I first saw him, Oh, Godfathers, he's going to be a difficult one. He was a pretty tough-looking old soldier to me, although he obviously wasn't very old. In practice, he was very helpful because I had the sense to ask him when I was stuck as to what to do next. When doing some training, I might say to him, I don't know, how the hell are we going to deal with this one? And he'd say, this is what I do, sir. It really worked quite well, and we got to know each other quite well. Lots of quite wells there. What do you think Fit thought of him?
Yeah, not so sure he took the same view, but one story perhaps perfectly exemplifies this situation, and I'm going to be Corporal Bill Seymour of the 2nd Norfolks. We used to go out on these firing ranges, and this young second lieutenant gave the order, 1 round rapid fire. We nicknamed him 1 round rapid from that day onward.
1 round rapid fire!
Oh dear.
That is a great story, probably apocryphal, but actually, more than one of them talked about that, so there you go. Now there's another officer. Well, were all the officers young and inexperienced?
No, certainly not, and Major Robert Scott certainly couldn't be described in that way. He was a former regular officer.
He's a dugout, isn't he?
Yeah, he'd served in the First World War, and actually he had a very unique way of drawing attention to himself that was quite simply unforgettable, armed as he often was with a sawn-off 303 Lee Enfield.
Now you're laughing. Why? Is that not normal to have a sawn?
That's very not normal. Particularly with regards to the recoil, I should think. But you're going to be Second Lieutenant Sam Horner once more of A Company.
Yep, I am. The day after I arrived, A Company were on the range, and I was told to go on the range with them. I didn't know what on earth I was supposed to do, and I stood there wondering, when suddenly there was the most awful explosion down my right ear, and a sheet of flame. And I thought, oh, God, what's happened? It was followed by, I'm Scott. Oh, God. Pirate Scott. I heard you were coming. That was my welcome from Robert Scott. He then said, have you heard of little Willie here? I said, yes, I have, sir. Voices going all over the place here. Yes, I have, sir. My father's told me all about him. Well, he said, you're going to fire it down the range. I'll show you how to do it. You take it out and you have to have that arm absolutely rigid. If it's bent, you'll kill yourself. So have it rigid. So it was loaded. I held it absolutely rigid, fired, and actually hit the target. But my arm went back straight over my head. Terrifying weapon. It was typical Robert. He was really a most dreadful fellow when he wasn't being shot at. He means in action, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So this is the sort of person who's just trouble.
I'm just trying to work out what rank Robert Scott was and where he came from by that accent.
A major, and clearly he came from Cornwall.
Right, okay.
Or Pirate Land.
Now,
Actually, Pirate is a good voice for Robert Scott. Arr!
Pirate Land. Now, another young second lieutenant whose father had commanded Scott later in the war found that he was being taken under his wing. And I'm going to be Second Lieutenant Dickie Davis of D Company, 2nd Norfolks.
I hope you're going to do Scott's accent the same. Otherwise, you'll confuse the listeners, Gary.
Scott said, "Are you by chance the son of Borneo Davis?" I said, "Yes, my father was in Borneo." He said, "I was his subaltern. I'll teach you to be a bloody good soldier like he was. I'll teach you all your father would have taught you." I think he chased me unduly hard to make sure I did things right. He said, "I owe this to your father."
That was as terrible as mine. Oh dear. Sorry, listeners. We apologise unreservedly. Now, whatever their rank, everyone comes to know Scott. I mean, later on he's the colonel, he's Lieutenant Colonel, the commanding there. But by sight and sound, he sort of stood out from his fellow man. And
he did.
I'm going to be Private Fred Hazel. Oh, he was a great bloke. D Company. He said this. I was making my way down to D Company for the first time, and I passed through B Company lines. Major Scott was outside his tent shaving, and I walked past him, and he bellowed out, "Come back, that man!" Oh, God, it's gone worse. I went across to him, and he said, "Don't you normally salute officers?" Considering the fact he was stripped to the waist, I didn't even know who he was. So I said, I'm sorry, sir, but I didn't notice you. The biggest bloody man in the British Army, and you didn't notice me? Jim lad.
Now, that's probably true, because physically, Scott was indeed an imposing figure. He was loud, tick, abrasive.
What are you thinking of?
Tick. But somehow strangely reassuring for men who knew that they would have to fight face-to-face with enemy infantry. Well, 2 out of 3, Pete.
2 out of 3, yeah.
Now, I'm going to be Bugler Bert May of HQ Company of the 2nd Norfolks. And he says...
He's talking about Scott again.
He's talking about Scott. He was a big bloke, over 6 foot, and he was broad as well. They made a song up about him. 10,000 miles away, one can hear him. He was born after his time. He should have been born in the Elizabethan era. He could have sunk the old Armada on his own. It's quite easy to mix up era and area.
Of course it is.
It is.
With your eyesight.
Yeah, well, it's getting better. Now, gradually, all these disparate parts...
So what are you talking? Old officers, young officers, people from Berkshire, people from Norwich, people, regulars... Warwickshires.
All being
Londoners,
forged together. To form the new 2nd Battalion Royal Norfolk Regiment. Now, a regular battalion only in name... It was nevertheless being moulded into a formidable fighting force, which could have been a credit to the pre-war army.
Well, I'm going to be Second Lieutenant Sam Horner, A Company still, and he's going to give his feelings. Good, steady old Norfolk chaps, many of them regular soldiers, a lot of drafts from the Royal Warwicks, Brummies, and the best of the Brummies were absolutely first class. Then a lot of Cockneys from various London sources, and they were marvellous.
Hooray!
We were putting all this together as a coherent battalion, weeding out the bad ones. That would have done for you.
Yeah.
and keep the good ones. Weeding out the bad ones, as you do, posting them back to the depot with a bad foot or something. Any old excuse. Quite ruthlessly got rid of the bad ones and kept the good ones until we were all working very well together. And it was a marvellous combination, especially when the bullets were flying about. The steady old Norfolk chap, very steady, plodding on. The mercurial Cockney, wanting to go faster, rushing about like a mad thing. The two of these gelled together to form a marvellous combination.
They would.
And they would. And they did. The second... Well, if you follow these podcasts, you'll hear they did brilliantly when they went to Burma. Now, there's still a long way to go. This is training. They've got to prove themselves in action yet. And there's a mountain of training to climb, isn't there? What have they got to do? What have they got to do?
You've got weapons training, route marching, tactical exercises, rapid deployment schemes. Now, this is all against a backdrop of endless specialist training in mortars, Bren carriers, Bren guns, signals, and all the myriad cornucopia of equipment needed by a modern infantry battalion at war.
I'll put that in specially to trip you up, because I'll write some of these. Yes, I didn't think you'd be able to manage that one. What's it mean, Gary?
Stuff.
Yeah, well,
various stuff.
Do you know, I think that's as good as any other answer.
Now, they were not to know that Hitler wouldn't invade that summer of 1940, and there was a real urgency about the anti-parachutist exercises that they were doing. And meanwhile, the Luftwaffe sent a reminder that they had by no means gone away. And you're once more going to be Private Fred Hazel of D Company.
We were on a route march almost back to camp when Driffield Airport was bombed in great strength. A whole load of bombers came over and they plastered the place. On the radio that evening, Lord Haw-Haw said, "We saw you Norfolks all scurrying for cover. It's your turn next."
You have heard Lord Haw-Haw, haven't you?
No, not recently. Everybody just sort of poked their fingers up. But what do you think he meant by poke their fingers up? I'm just doing it to you now.
V for victory, I think.
At the thought of it. The most dramatic thing was they left one hangar standing. The following day, they sent one bomber over on its own and flattened the last one. Quite incredible. Now, that's interesting, because that's the sort of story where I think, I wonder if that's apocryphal or true. That's the thing with all... You could check it. In fact, somebody who's really good at history could check it. But do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean about two perfect stories? Just maybe slightly...
I should think you could find that out on the internet if you wanted to.
Well, I'll leave that to you, Gary. You can post a little note up about it, perhaps.
Could do. Now, in the post-Dunkirk paranoia about fifth column activities and general spy scares, it was considered essential to set up some anti-espionage patrols. And who am I going to be, Pete?
You're going to be Corporal Bill Seymour of the 2nd Norfolks.
There was a lot of reports of enemy spies, light shining from the trees in the woods. We used to have a patrol go round, an NCO with 5 or 6 chaps with you. You'd go all round the grounds looking out for any lights or any suspicious things. It was very eerie at times, walking through these woods and the fields. You'd hear a rustle, and when you got closer, there was a big fat cow standing there.
Now, we heard, isn't that funny? Because just think, 20 years before, their dads were busy shooting cows in the field, probably. I think we had a couple of stories in our podcast about training with the British Army in 1914-18, shooting cows on those things. Anyway...
we did. Now, you're going to continue the story by being Private Stan Roffey of the Carrier Platoon, HQ Company, 2nd Norfolks.
Oh, am I? Why do I want to do that? Now, it's just this is a story. It's basically just a give and take of army life, isn't it? This is because while they're doing all this training, it's still going on. Life. So this is what Stan Roffey says. George Lee, he was a bit of a comedian, always getting up to tricks. George said to me, "Stan, we'll have a laugh here. Come with me, and we'll go into the signals tent." We went into the tent and they were all sitting there, and George said, "Guess what's happened? There's fleas in the camp, and we've all got to have our hair cut from our privates and under our armpits." Ah, Christ. We left their tent and went back. Then George said to me, "Let's have a look and see what they're doing." When we went in, they'd got their trousers down, and there they were, cutting their hair off their privates with the scissors from their housewife. And that's just a great practical joke, and I love the idea of them all going, "Oh, bloody lies." I would never tell lies to some of my friends to try and get them to do something like that.
And what's a housewife, Pete?
Housewife is a hussif, and it's a little kit of things,
Sewing
sewing gear,
scissors,
cottons,
that sort of thing.
Yeah, every soldier has them. I think it comes to hussif.
Now, an even more successful joke was played on the Provost Sergeant, and Corporal Bill Seymour says, "The Provost Sergeant's name was Cassidy, nicknamed Hopalong, naturally. He, like several of the old soldiers, liked his glass of ale, and he often came home a bit tiddly at night. In these woods it used to be pitch dark, and it was muddy. There was all these bell tents with all the ropes all over the place. The regimental police part of the woods was right up in an isolated corner, so he could find his way through easily to his own tent. He'd lined the passageway with luminous bark which was prevalent in these woods from a certain species of tree. He came in at night and just walked down in between these lines of luminous bark into his own tent. One night, some of us thought we'd play a joke on old Hopalong, so we redirected this luminous bark so that it led right into a slit trench. Lo and behold, Hopalong came along, whoosh, straight into the trench. Some years afterwards, he joined the London branch. One night we told him about this. 'Oh, it was you bastards,' he said. 'I got scratched to blazes.' But at least he could see the funny side of it."
Oh, but he couldn't at the time, definitely. Now, there was one terrible horror. I mean, the Norfolks had suffered enough, but the local population inflicted something even worse on them when they put on a sort of concert for them. And I'm going to be Private Fred Hazel of D Company. And he says, "Some of these concert parties laid on by the church societies and things like that consist of dear little old ladies who would stand up and sing Britannia." Pretty awful stuff, really. So, of course, the lads just used to disappear. And after 10 minutes, there was nobody left in the marquee. The company commander said, "Hazel, you'll patrol the outside of the marquee and don't let anybody leave." So if I saw anybody climbing underneath the side walls, I stamped on their fingers and they went back in again to that awful suffering. Can you imagine? You've been at Naughty Lumps concerts. You've suffered.
I can imagine, yeah, I've suffered. Now, as the colder weather sets in, the living conditions in the tents steadily deteriorated until, in October, the battalion was moved to the village of Hessel, which lay opposite Hull across the River Humber.
Ooh, the big splashy thing.
The big splashy thing. Now, they're billeted in large requisitioned houses, Pete.
Oh, yeah. So the officers would establish a proper mess in one of the bigger houses, I presume. And that must have been quite interesting because you've got all these new officers having to settle in, and there'd still be some of the older types, wouldn't there?
Some
of the ones who'd even been through France. How did they gel together? Well, you're going to tell us. You're going to be Second Lieutenant Maurice Francis of the 2nd Norfolks.
They were a bit cliquey. There were some officers that I almost didn't come to know. There were only 30 of us or so in the mess. Those in my own company I naturally soon came to know because we were working together all day long. But otherwise, little cliques used to develop. It was quite competitive between the officers. One felt it, competing for the favour of the senior officers. There were quite a lot of regular officers still there, and there was a bit of a gap. Some overcame it, better than others. Murray Brown was very good at that. He was a regular, but it didn't make any difference. I can understand the regulars taking that view a little bit. After all, they joined the army before the war, and they had their rules. Then all of a sudden, they were being invaded by all these outsiders.
Now, they're also, these older officers, although a lot of the younger officers wouldn't know it, they're watching their juniors, seeing how they behave and who would and wouldn't make the grade. They could tell, things like drinking too much in the mess or just being inappropriate. Meanwhile, so the officers' mess, important, but what's more important to a battalion, do you think?
Well, the sergeant's mess. So I would imagine they were very keen to establish one as well.
A properly functioning one. And you're going to explain, Sergeant Burfitt, what better man to explain this?
If you've got good sergeant's mess, you've got a good battalion. You can always guarantee that. They worked together, always ready to listen to anything that came up. Always keen to help one another. You had your bar, used to drink about 10 or 12 pints of beer in a session. No, it never affected me the next morning. You could drink what you liked, providing stand on your feet, and you were sensible. Nobody would say anything to you. But if you got drunk so you fell down, that was a disgrace, and you'd be in hot water the next day. Hang on, can we just go back to that? 10 or 12 pints.
Yeah, I'd struggle with that.
I'd be on my back.
So
and if not, I'd go home.
That's so naughty. Now, if you were newly promoted, I mean, some of the conscripts must have felt it must have been quite intimidating. People like Fit in the mess, quite strict, all the rest of it. So I'm going to be Sergeant Fred Hazel of D Company, and he tells you what it was like. He says this: I was probably the second conscript to enter the sergeant's mess. For a long, long time, it was very difficult to join in the conversation because they were all talking about what they did in Egypt in 1931, what happened in Pune in 1933. Do you remember old so-and-so and all this, that and the other? You were completely left out. You just sort of sat there and listened. Slowly, of course, more conscripts came into the mess. And in the end, there was quite a good blend. Of course, everything's moving on, everything develops. So what are the men doing?
Well, they're sort of roaming about the cheery taverns of Hessel.
Oh, Hessel's famous for its cheery taverns.
Now, in the main, they made their own entertainment. There was, of course, the usual army rivalry with other battalions that had the temerity to trespass onto their territory.
So a battalion would have a pub that was it.
Yeah, and the main enemy of the Norfolks were the 1st Royal Scots.
Surely they're the main...
They're the main enemy of everyone, really, aren't they? Who were billeted just the other side of the Humber.
This is a bit of an anti-tank obstacle. Does it stop the Royal Scots?
No, the Royal Scots pay the Norfolks a friendly visit, and the two proud regiments had a bit of a bizarre mating ritual too. And you're going to be Private Stan Roffey of the Carrier Platoon HQ Company.
I'm not sure mating ritual is the right word for a punch-up, but this is what he says. I'd had a few drinks and I knew there was going to be trouble. The looks and the arguments, I could see it happening. They were tanked up with beer, the Royal Scots. They were good at that. I thought, I'm going to get out of this. What a sensible man. But I was too late. I couldn't get out. All of a sudden, somebody threw a gas mask at somebody. What up? I thought, well, I've got to join in here. I can't stand here watching. Well, that's soldier life. Punching and kicking, and then I thought, bugger this. Oh, not quite so good. There was a billiard table, and I got under it out of the way. It gradually quietened down, and it all broke up. They got the police up there. I think the publican phoned them up. We weren't far from the billets, and I just walked in, and when I went to undress, I got billiard balls in my pockets. I don't know how they got there. Whether I'd pick them up to throw them or what? Well, yes.
Yeah. Now, Colonel Winter, he'd appointed Sergeant Bert Fitt as his provost sergeant.
Ah, this is what you said, isn't it?
Yes, this is poacher turned gamekeeper here, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
He's adopted that tried and trusted principle. And he sets a poacher to be his gamekeeper. And Fitt's been the despair of provost
He was
sergeants.
a real troublemaker, especially in the pre-war years. He would he'd do bare-knuckle fighting, local
and now what's
fairs.
his job?
He's a provost sergeant. Stop it all that.
He's got to prevent...
Was he keen on that job?
Well, he took it with an enthusiasm that was almost as excessive as his pre-war activities. And Sergeant Bert Fitt says this: "The Royal Scots and the Norfolks used to fight like blazes. Every night you'd get some of them fighting. I'd get hold of the first one that was fighting nearest me, and I'd sling him in a room for a few hours to quieten them down."
He means his cell, doesn't he? Yeah.
He does. Put them on a charge, and they'd be up the next morning. The second in command was Bob Scott. When you marched into him, you give your evidence. He used to ask you straight out who was winning. If you said that the Royal Scot was winning, they got punished. But if the Norfolk was winning, they used to get a rocket. But Scott let them get away with it.
These two people, by the way, Scott and Fitt, they're going to be all over the rest of the podcasts on the Norfolks. They're a classic pair, aren't they? What a pair of characters they are. Now, what does Fitt do? Well, I could picture him doing it. As I can see him in my mind's eye. He used to patrol the mean streets of Hessel. Sorry.
Why do you find that funny? I've been to Hessel.
I haven't been to Hessel, but I now have this picture of some sort of Wild West town. And he took to wearing plimsolls instead of his iron-studded army boots. Why? Why, Gary?
Well, he didn't want to upset the locals, but also...
I don't think that's it.
He wanted to catch his miscreants or victims all unawares.
He'd creep up behind him, wouldn't he?
Yeah, his punishment parade soon acquired a reputation which was second to none.
Now, now we've got a more serious side just overcoming us because they're at Hessel. So what's happening close to Hessel?
Well, they're within sight of the ferocious German air raids on Hull,
and the battalion, it's like a reservoir, isn't it, of manpower to help out. The emergency services must have been stretched to the very limits, mustn't they? And on one occasion, it's a funny story, but it's
against the backdrop of terror, really, from the air raids.
So Fitt and a party of men, they're sent across to help, and they've got the water hoses out because there's a fire in the timber stacks area of the docks, and you can picture it, stacks of timber stacked high, and they're on fire. And then suddenly, and you're playing this part, Winky Fitt becomes uncomfortably aware that things were hotting up, but not quite as one would want. Carry on, Provost Sergeant.
Things were getting very warm behind me, and I thought it was the heat from the fire that was burning. I was controlling this hose, and all of a sudden somebody put a hose on me. I wasn't very pleased, but when I put my hand behind to see how wet it was, I just felt bare skin. All my seat of my trousers was all burnt out. I was on fire and didn't know it. They had put the fire out. It was rather embarrassing because I'd got no seat in my trousers.
Now, that's a funny quote, but the next one isn't funny, is it? And because other parties were clearing the roads, shoveling up houses falling in the roads, all the rest of it, clearing the rubble away. And of course, there's civilian casualties, and there's terrible things, and you're going to be Private Dick Fiddermont. He's normally a cheery cove, I'll tell you, I remember him well. And what does he say?
I saw a young girl, 15 or 16. She lay partly on the pavement, her legs on the road and a cycle near. She looked as though she was asleep. I touched the pulse on the left wrist, pushing 2 fingers down, and there was no pulse there. She looked like wax, and she was obviously dead, but there wasn't a mark on her. I was told it was blast.
No, that's terrible. In January 1941, the battalion's sent on combined operations training. They go to HMS Glen Eirn.
To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever!
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't outtrain her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Bada, bada boom, sold.
Huh?
Just sold my car on Carvana. Dropping it off and getting paid today.
Already?
What, you still haven't sold yours? You told me about it months ago. Is the offer good?
Oh, the offer's great.
Don't have another car yet?
I could trade it in for this car I love.
Come on, what are we waiting for?
You're right.
Let's go.
Whether you're looking to sell your car right now or just whenever feels right, go to Carvana.com and sell your car the convenient way. Terms and conditions apply.
The dog's farted.
That's a shame.
This is a sad bit as well.
It's not reached me yet.
HMS Glenelg and Loch Fyne. And they're one of the first units to try out the new assault landing craft. Now, these are going to be all the rage, if you know what I mean, in Sicily and the rest of it. These are assault landing craft, all the rest of it. They're for the long term. They're going for the invasion of Europe. They're for D-Day and all the rest of it. What do you think it was like, Scotland in January, for training on an assault landing craft?
Oh, it'd be like a midsummer's day, I think.
And I'm going to be Sergeant Fred Hazel, who doesn't find it like a midsummer's day. And he says this: we were roused at 3, but he never complained.
Never.
We were roused at 3 or 4 in the morning with klaxons going. You hopped out of your hammock, put your gear on, and reported to your station on deck on the landing craft. Then down the scrambling nets into the assault landing craft, which were bobbing about down below. That all sounds great fun, but this was in sub-zero temperatures. It was bitterly cold. To create the impression you were way out to sea, the assault landing craft would bob around for, say, 20 or 25 minutes before going into the beach. These flat-bottomed boats used to send spray all over you, and although we were kitted out with leather jerkins, your hands got so cold that you just couldn't even feel the rifle. You held it as though you were nursing a baby. You'd touch down and run up the beach, which was at that time covered in 18 inches of snow. We ran 20 yards inland, flopped down on the snow, lay there for 20 minutes or so, and then that was the exercise finished. We'd re-embark back to the ship. By this time, you'd be so bloody cold that when you got aboard the heat would hit you. It got to be 80 degrees plus on the ship, and after a few minutes, all the joints of your hands would start to throb. God, it was so painful. Now, recently, you've had a bit of an experience like this, because I took you on your holidays with some of the other management committee, and we took you to York and Durham, didn't we? And you suffered the tortures of hell, didn't you? It was cold, it was hilly, it was the north of England, you couldn't get any sleep, you were surrounded by people who hated you.
And I was with you.
I was like an oasis of calm, wasn't I?
Yeah, I might start calling you father.
Thank you.
Because you're, like a father to me. You looked after me so well.
That's right. So you can empathise with the suffering, the cold, the freezing, the wet, the misery of this.
Well, it's just normal life in Scotland.
Or Northern England.
Yeah. Now, back again at Hessel, the training continued remorselessly with a particular emphasis on route marches, because it was felt the men had not been fit enough in France in 1940.
Yeah, I get the sense this might have been that Montgomery effect we've talked about before. Montgomery was very keen on getting the men as fit as possible. However, this battalion doesn't entirely do it all as Montgomery went. Montgomery was very insistent that everybody do it. And you're going to be Sergeant Fred Rolleston of D Company.
There were very intensive route marches brought about because of the lack of fitness in France. Every other day, a 10-mile route march in full service marching order, a fair weight. Then it was stepped up to 25 miles a day, twice a week. The final one was a 50-mile march in 24 hours. You were not allowed back in until you got the last man home. That meant the fit ones were carrying 2 or 3 rifles, somebody had got the Bren gun, and the weak ones were being held up either side by 2 of the others to get them home. You had to get the whole squad back, and you couldn't go into your houses until you'd got the last man back.
Now, in charge of them at this point was still... remember, we said he was a bit of a character, was Colonel Winter. He was a press-on soldier, and he may have slightly misjudged the mood of his men when he was showing off in front of his opposite number in the 1st 8th Battalion Lancashire Fusiliers, another fine body of men. And he was showing off, and Fred Hazel certainly wasn't impressed.
And you're going to be Sergeant Fred Hazel.
I knew that.
Of D Company.
I knew that. I was just setting the scene for a bit of excitement. We'd been out for the best part of 24 hours. We'd crept off at the crack of dawn one day, done manoeuvres, and we were due to be transported back to the billets because we were then about 25 to 30 miles away from the billet. The CO of the Lancashire Fusiliers turned to Colonel Winter and said, "Our men look knackered." He said, "They're not. I'll prove it to you." He sent the transport off and we walked back.
Nice of him.
He was very unpopular all round. And this was a sort of typical action one would have expected from him. It means he don't like him. Had he walked with us, I don't think anybody would have complained. But when he drives alongside you in his open wagon, that is really irritating. And that's not what Montgomery, who was in favour, he was insisting that all ranks do this. That was what Montgomery was after. Anyway, divisional exercise. They're on Ilkley Moor Bartat, I was about to say, but I mispronounced it entirely. And while they were out there, I love the next quote, and it's from Private Dick Fiddermont, and you're going to read this. And he takes the opportunity while they're out on the moors to play a really brilliant practical joke, which I think shows it just deserves a bigger audience. And I'm hoping this podcast will allow more of you to appreciate the sheer fun of this quote. Go, Dick, go.
There was myself, Jimmy Wright, Alfie Clements, Percy Utting, Tommy Nutt. Off we tramped down to Ilkley to see if there was any chance of a drink and some cigarettes for the boys who smoked. No luck, but they did say that they had some cider. We had a drop, not much, probably a couple of halves. Then we started back to camp. It was getting dusk, a slight drizzle, and we cut across the marshes. Jimmy Wright and some of these London boys hadn't seen a cow in a field. As you know, if you cross a meadow where there are cattle, they tend to group together. If they see you, they're curious. They'll come towards you and nuzzle you, but they wouldn't hurt you. But Jimmy didn't know this. Oh no, we were coming across this field and there was a low mist, a bit ethereal, looks a bit weird, and you could see the cattle. Me, being evil, I said to Percy Utting, "We'll get old Jimmy going, tell him they're bulls." Jimmy was plodding along in front. He was a big fellow. "Jimmy, these bloody bulls, they're coming towards us." I said to Percy, "Pass the word discreetly. When we say run, run." We lumbered forwards. I could run. I was fairly athletic. So could the others. But Jimmy, no way. He smoked quite a bit. He was cursing and blinding. "Run, Jimmy, run!" These fields had dikes. When you got close, you could see a few reeds and the sheen of the water. We ran and jumped 3 or 4 foot. Jimmy, he came thumping up, and he stopped as soon as he saw the water. The cows weren't charging, but in his imagination, he could see himself being gored to death. "Jump, Jimmy!" He went back a pace or two, and he jumped. Needless to say, he didn't make it. He was in it up to his knees. We were falling all over laughing.
I think that's a great story. I just jump, Jimmy, jump. Run, Jimmy.
Cows can, on occasion, be quite aggressive, can't they?
They are the enemy of the Hart family. Once I was attacked saved by my brother-in-law, and then my sister was attacked and not saved by my brother-in-law. I've often wondered about that. But, she ended up being trodden on by a
So
cow.
perhaps that was more dangerous than it at first appeared. And
Perhaps.
Jimmy was right to be in fear.
Perhaps so.
Now, during the various exercises and trials of 1940-41, the NCOs got to know the long-term qualities and limitations of their officers. Some were not just wet behind the ears, some were just plain incompetent.
Oh, short rabbit! What? Oh, I've forgotten it. One
rapid fire.
I forgot the orders. I'm even more incompetent than he was.
You're going to be Sergeant Fred Hazel of D Company.
We got on pretty well together. I suppose to some degree I carried the man. You don't let these things look apparent. It was all done rather discreetly. He couldn't read a map. He couldn't find his way out of a paper bag, which is a bit of a disadvantage when you're an infantryman. We had an exercise laid on for the officers, and they were trailed by the sergeants, who then had to report back on their performance. Mine came straight out of the company commander's tent and went in the wrong direction, right from the very start. That was the sort of thing you had to put up with. You had to say, why don't we try going over there for a change? I'd do it as tactfully as I could. He was courageous, but he was the sort of chap you could well imagine leading you all into a disaster. He was not the sort of fella that I would pin any faith in him coming out of the other end. Now, you had an expression for this, I think you used in one of the training things, which is something you wouldn't follow the officer to. We wouldn't follow the officer to
the chip shop at the end of the road,
Yeah.
Now, despite this, the more intelligent young officers gradually gained experience, and they begin to form a constructive working relationship with their long-suffering platoon sergeants.
I think this is because we can make too many jokes about this, because there are intelligence officers, and that some of them do learn. It is a learning process, and a second lieutenant is an officer under training, isn't he?
And the relationship with the sergeant is actually really important.
Yeah.
To both parties. I'm not saying that the sergeants knew everything, because they didn't, but it does teach, how to work together with varying degrees of success.
And Fred Hazel's bloke sounds hopeless, but I'll be honest, Second Lieutenant Maurice Francis, I think he became a good officer, and you've got a quote from him now. You're talking about his platoon sergeant.
He's talking about his platoon sergeant, yeah. He was a nice chap who took me under his wing. He quite obviously recognised a very raw young officer. He knew much more about army ways than I did, and he helped me along. The troops knew what was going on, understood it, and didn't object to it. They accepted officers as a necessary evil and learnt to work with them. One got to feel those who respected one. Also, the distinction between respect for the individual officer as opposed to respect for the rank. I was protected by my rank, and whatever I did, within limits, however wrong, in training particularly, I would be supported by my senior officers. But I could tell by the look in the eyes of the chaps if I did something which they thought was a bit off. Rank was there as a fallback. That was all. And
that's right, isn't it? I mean, he's an intelligent young officer, and he does things wrong, and he gradually learns, and that's the idea of it. And if you ask any British officer now, they'll still tell you the most important man to them was their platoon sergeant, and he taught them more than Sandhurst probably in many ways. Certainly about men
and their lance corporals, they'd say.
Yeah, no,
oh.
Not the sort of lance corporal you were.
Oh, okay. Now. The men knew that they were destined for overseas service, but they didn't know where they were going. It remained a secret. And then finally, they get a rather substantial clue. And you're going to be where you started, really, Sergeant Ben McRae of the Carrier Platoon HQ Company.
We were issued with tropical kit. That horrible topi, khaki drill shorts, shirts, shorts that turned down, socks. We walked along the road from the headquarters to our billets, loaded with all this gear, and they said, "Don't say nothing." I mean, the most naive person in the world couldn't have failed to see that the unit, sometime or other, was booked to go overseas. Now, there's something wrong with your dog.
Yeah, he's moved again, hasn't he? He's presenting his backside to you, I think.
Yeah. So in December of 1941, the battalion move. Where are they moving to?
They moved to a concentration area around the village of Fairford, which is
And who's concentrating there?
Well, many of the men and
Their 2nd Division.
Oh, sorry, yes, the 2nd Division. I thought I'd said that. Did I not say that? Oh, I missed that out, Pete. Sorry, mate. Sorry.
I just wanted him to know.
Oh, Jesus.
Aha!
Sorry. Yeah, Fred is alive and kicking.
Well, not for much longer if he keeps doing this.
Now, many of the men and several of the local women were heartbroken to see them leave, Hazel.
And I'm going to be Sergeant Ben McRae again. He says this. The night we left, we were down their ferry boat, and it was funny. All the girlfriends came in that night, and they were all crying their eyes out. One of the buglers, Sid, he had 2 big fat girls crying their eyes out all over him. That's quite a nice but sad thing. But rumours are still going on. They've been given the tropical kit, but the British Army is perfectly capable of being given tropical kit and saying, this is just a ruse. We're on our way to Iceland. And this is Private Dick Finnemer, always one of my favourites of the 2nd Norfolks.
We knew by then we were off somewhere, but where we didn't know. Then, as in every army, you get the rumours. We went everywhere, from Hawaii to Iceland to the North Pole to the South Pole. You name it, we were going. Absolute nonsense.
Now, they're inspected, as ever. Before any battalion goes to war, they're inspected. So this time it was the King and Churchill. That must have cheered them up enormously. And then the battalion was once again ready for war.
Yeah, but parting from loved ones was often traumatic, particularly if they'd got children. And you're going to be Sergeant Walter Gilding of the Mortar Platoon HQ Company.
I find this one sad because he'd already had a rough time. He was one of the ones who'd managed to escape. He'd been in the 1940 campaign. Anyway, he says this, and I just want you to think about what this means. Think about, nowadays people don't play cricket. Because their wives are pregnant, or football. But in those days, you just... this is what Gilding says. I had a special 72 hours compassionate leave when my baby was born. I went to Wisbech, which is the other side of King's Lynn, and saw my wife and child. While I was on that special leave, I applied for a further extension of 72 hours, so I had 6 days leave to see my baby. She was only 3 days old when I left. That's why I had the extension. It hadn't been born in that time. Wow. I just think, imagine how you'd feel. Your baby's just been born and you're off and you might never see your wife or this baby again, ever, because you could be killed. And a lot of them were. So, overall, I'd say that war's a pretty awful thing. Even in the lighter-hearted moments.
Now, on that note, Pete, I'd like to thank you for today and... I need to get out of this room and leave Fred
to stew in his own juices. And when I say
juices, that's appropriate.
There must be some liquid to give that smell. Cheers.
Cheers, Pete.
The new Boost Mobile network is offering unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for life.
That sounds like a threat.
Then how do you think we should say it?
Unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month for the rest of your life?
I don't know.
Until your ultimate demise.
What if we just say forever?
Okay.
$25 a month, forever.
Get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile forever.
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
You might be right. It's simple, but something you almost never hear in politics today, with each side more concerned about scoring political points than solving problems. I'm Bill Haslam, a Republican.
And I'm Phil Bredesen, a Democrat. We're former Tennessee governors, and we invite you to listen to our podcast, You Might Be Right. Join us and guests like Al Gore, Paul Ryan, Judy Woodruff, as we take on important issues facing our country.
Listen and subscribe to You Might Be Right, a new podcast from the Baker School at the University of Tennessee.
Wake up with the keys to an L certified by Lexus, voted best certified pre-owned program 7 years in a row.
Available 5.99% APR financing on a 2018 through 2024 L certified RX and RXH for up to 72 months. Lexus was awarded 2024 Best CPO Program by U.S. News and World Report. View U.S. News Best Cars at cars.usnews.com. Call 1-800-USA-LEXUS for important lease cash offer and pricing details. Restrictions apply. Not all customers will qualify. Offer available in the Eastern area. Only ends November 4th, 2024.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn more about each episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you have a couple of options. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/PGMH, or consider subscribing to the podcast for only £2 per month and get ad-free listening and bonus content. You can find links for both on our Facebook and Twitter accounts.
Sounds great, doesn't it?